The forest around us was a canvas of darkness, the moon's feeble glow offering little solace as my two newfound friends and I embarked on what we thought would be an adventurous night hike. The campfire had flickered low, casting long, eerie shadows that danced between the trees. Greg, a tall and wiry guy with an infectious laugh, led the way with his flashlight, while Emily, a quiet and reserved girl with a penchant for mystery novels, followed close behind. And then there was me, caught somewhere between excitement and unease. The path was narrow, overgrown with gnarled roots and tangled underbrush that seemed determined to trip us up. But the thrill of the unknown propelled us forward, our flashlights cutting through the inky blackness. With each step, the woods seemed to swallow us whole, enveloping us in a cocoon of silence broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot. As we hiked deeper, the air grew colder, and a sense of foreboding settled over us like a heavy fog. Greg's boisterous laughter had faded, replaced by a tense silence that hung between us. Emily clutched my arm, her fingers trembling slightly, her wide eyes reflecting the nervousness that had taken root within us all. "We should turn back," I suggested, my voice hushed, almost swallowed by the darkness. But Greg dismissed my concerns with a careless wave of his hand. "Nah, come on, it's just a bit further. You guys are overreacting," he said, his bravado masking the unease I could see flickering in his eyes. We pressed on, the woods growing denser around us, the path becoming increasingly treacherous. The rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl seemed to take on a sinister edge, and a shiver ran down my spine. I glanced at Emily, her grip on my arm tightening, and I knew she felt it too. The woods were not as empty as they seemed. It was then that Greg stumbled to a halt, his flashlight beam fixed on a clearing up ahead. Relief washed over us as we stepped into the open space, the moonlight casting an eerie glow on the scene before us. A dilapidated cabin stood at the center of the clearing, its windows shattered, its wooden walls sagging with age. Emily gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "What is this place?" Greg grinned, his bravado returning. "Looks like we stumbled upon a hidden gem, guys. A real adventure." Despite my lingering unease, I couldn't help but feel a sense of curiosity. We approached the cabin cautiously, our flashlights revealing a scene frozen in time. Dust-covered furniture lay in disarray, cobwebs hung like gauzy curtains, and a thick layer of decay clung to every surface. Emily stepped inside, her flashlight sweeping over the decaying remnants of what might have once been a home. "It's like a time capsule," she mused, her voice tinged with a mix of wonder and trepidation. As we explored further, we uncovered an old journal, its pages brittle and yellowed with age. Greg eagerly snatched it up, flipping through the entries with a childlike excitement. "Listen to this," he said, his voice cracking slightly as he read aloud. "It speaks of a darkness that seeps into the very fabric of the woods, a malevolent force that feeds on the lost and the desperate." Emily and I exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the words hanging heavy in the air. The cabin felt like a relic of a forgotten time, a place where the boundary between reality and the supernatural had blurred. Hours passed, and the initial thrill of discovery gave way to a growing sense of dread. The cabin's walls seemed to close in around us, and a strange energy pulsed through the air. Our flashlights grew dimmer, the batteries draining inexplicably fast, and a chilling wind whispered through the cracks in the walls. "We need to leave," I insisted, my voice quivering. "This place isn't right." Greg nodded in agreement, but as we turned to go, Emily froze in her tracks, her gaze fixed on something beyond the cabin's shattered window pane. I followed her line of sight, and my blood turned to ice. A figure stood in the moonlit clearing, its tattered clothes billowing in the wind. Its face was obscured by shadows, and a sense of dread settled over me like a heavy weight. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The figure didn't respond, its presence a silent, haunting presence. I felt a hand on my shoulder and I jumped, turning to see Greg's panicked expression. "We have to go now," he whispered urgently. As we retreated from the cabin, the figure remained motionless, its hollow gaze following us until we were swallowed by the darkness of the woods once more. Our footsteps were quick and frantic, the path blurring beneath us as we fled, our hearts pounding in unison. Eventually, we burst out of the woods and stumbled back into camp, our breaths ragged, our faces pale. The campfire had dwindled to embers, and the others who had stayed behind were fast asleep in their tents, unaware of the horrors we had encountered. We huddled together by the dying fire, recounting our harrowing experience. But as I looked at Greg, a sinking feeling settled in my gut. His eyes were wild, his laughter no longer infectious but tinged with a manic edge. It was as if something had changed within him, something dark and unsettling. And then, with a chilling smile, Greg produced a knife from his pocket, its blade gleaming in the faint firelight. "You know, I always loved a good horror story," he said, his voice dripping with malice. Emily and I exchanged horrified glances, the realization hitting us like a freight train. Greg had lured us into the woods, orchestrated this twisted game of fear and survival. He was the malevolent force the journal had spoken of, the darkness that had seeped into the very fabric of the woods. The night air grew colder, the forest around us seeming to close in as Greg advanced, the knife glinting in his hand. Our hearts raced as we backed away, our minds racing for a way to escape. But the woods that had once seemed so alluring now felt like a labyrinth of death, and as Greg's maniacal laughter echoed through the trees, we knew that our fight for survival had only just begun. Fear gripped us as we stumbled backward, the crackling embers of the campfire casting eerie shadows that danced across Greg's face. His eyes gleamed with a manic intensity, and the knife he held seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. Emily and I were trapped, our backs against the cold, unyielding trees, the sinister laughter echoing through the night like a twisted symphony. "Greg, this isn't funny!" Emily's voice trembled, her eyes wide with terror. "Put the knife down!" Greg's grin widened, his face contorted into an unsettling mask of glee. "Oh, but it's the perfect ending to our little adventure, don't you think? A story they'll tell around the campfire for years to come." My mind raced, desperately seeking an escape from the nightmare unfolding before us. I scanned the darkness for any sign of help, but the camp remained silent and still, the others still blissfully unaware of the horror that had taken hold of our night. With a surge of adrenaline, I lunged at Greg, my fingers wrapping around his wrist as I fought to wrest the knife from his grip. Emily joined in, her fear giving her strength, and together we managed to knock the weapon from his hand. Greg's laughter turned to enraged shouts as he struggled against us, his strength surprising given his lean frame. "We need to tie him up," I panted, desperation lending clarity to my thoughts. Emily nodded, and we quickly improvised restraints using our shoelaces and some discarded rope nearby. With Greg immobilized, his laughter gave way to a chilling calmness. "You don't understand," he hissed, his eyes locked on me with a disturbing intensity. "I was chosen by the woods, by the darkness that resides here. It's a privilege to be a part of it." Emily and I exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to respond to his delusional ramblings. But even as he spoke, a rustling in the underbrush nearby caught our attention. A figure emerged from the shadows, its movements slow and deliberate. "Greg, what have you done?" The voice was unmistakable. It was one of our fellow campers, a friend we had known for years. His expression was a mix of concern and confusion as he took in the scene before him. "Help us," I pleaded, relieved to see a familiar face but still wary of the darkness that had consumed Greg. As our friend rushed forward to untie Greg, the atmosphere grew tense, the forest itself seeming to hold its breath. But as soon as Greg was free, his demeanor shifted, his eyes narrowing with a predatory glint. In one swift motion, he lunged at our friend, the gleaming knife finding its mark. Time seemed to slow as our friend's eyes widened in shock, his body collapsing to the ground. Emily screamed, her voice piercing the night, and I felt a surge of adrenaline as I grappled with Greg, fighting to wrest the knife from his grip once again. In the ensuing struggle, the knife slipped from his hand, clattering to the forest floor. Emily grabbed a nearby rock, her face twisted with determination, and swung it at Greg with all her might. The impact sent him stumbling backward, his eyes wide with disbelief as he crumpled to the ground. We were left breathless, our hearts pounding, as the reality of what had just transpired sank in. Our friend lay motionless, the forest around us seeming to hold its breath as if in mourning. And Greg, the source of our terror, now lay defeated, his malevolent reign of darkness brought to an abrupt end. Tears streamed down Emily's face as she sank to her knees, her voice a whisper as she looked at me. "We have to go back to camp. We have to tell them." Numbly, we made our way back through the woods, our minds a whirlwind of shock and disbelief. The campsite remained unchanged, a stark contrast to the horrors we had just experienced. As we approached the campfire, our other friends stirred from their sleep, their faces a mix of confusion and concern. "What happened?" one of them asked, their voices filled with grogginess. Emily and I exchanged a solemn glance, knowing that the events of the night were beyond explanation. We had a hike," I stammered, my voice shaky. "It went wrong." Our friends looked at us with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity, unaware of the darkness that had unfolded just beyond their perception. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, we gathered around the campfire, the flames casting a warm glow that pushed back the lingering shadows of the night. The events of that night would forever be etched into our memories, a chilling reminder that even in the most familiar of places, darkness can take hold, twisting reality and shattering our sense of safety. And as I gazed into the dancing flames, I couldn't help but wonder, what other terrors lurked within the depths of the woods, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to venture into their grasp?